Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. And today you are tuned into the art of balancing ambient and artificial light. Nobody does it better than our guest joining us now, Sony Artisan of Imagery, Scott Robert Lim. Scott, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me again. You really challenged me on this lecture when you wanted me to talk about it because I thought, well, doesn't everybody do it pretty good? Then I had to start thinking like, why does he see tons of photographers, so why does he separate mine out? And so I had to really think about like what I do differently than other people, and it forced me down into some interesting things that I discovered. I can't wait to share it actually.
I love it. Well, huge thank you to Sony. Huge thank you to Scott Robert Lim for joining us. Really, really, really pay attention, everybody. This is, if you look through a folder of his images, you will not know 90% of his lighting schemes. So this is why he's here talking about this today. I'm going to turn it over to you, Scott, and I'll remind everybody, if you do have any questions, get them into the comment section on YouTube,
Yes,
and I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
you got it. Okay, let's see here. All right, let's get to the top here and hit my play button. Okay, so I kind of changed the title a little bit because it's really about the art of light sculpting, right? Like, how do I craft this light? How do I kind of add it onto my subject and into my background? It's kind of like sculpting something. And it's kind of takes a long time to figure out your signature style and how to do it, how to work with your tools and all that kind of stuff. But basically, it's going to talk about how I balance artificial light with ambient light and how I get my look doing it. So I had to really think about, well, what is my style? And I think I basically borrow from like four different types of lighting um, techniques, right? One is cinematic, and cinematic is all about ambiguity, right? When you watch a movie, you don't think, oh, they're putting a video light on them. I can tell, right? So whenever you watch a movie, it's supposed to be very organic and natural. And that's really a lot of part of my style, the cinematic. And then you have to be sure that it just looks kind of almost in a way very natural, photojournalistic, right? Even though it's not photojournalistic, you're making it look that way. Then I'm a portrait artist, right? And I love using soft light. I love using hard light. I use a lot of short side lighting, which I'll get into. And I've shot a lot of weddings, and that's kind of all part of my makeup too. And then on top of that, I love shooting fashion. What's fashion about? Fashion's about color and detail and texture, right? And even the way I pose has kind of a fashion forward feel to it. So I like that. And that's blended into my work. And then even when I used to submit for a lot of awards, you'd have to kind of do this fine art type of style, which basically you have to post process your images and light them as if it's kind of like a painting, like a Rembrandt painting and things like that. So I took a lot of styles from, I guess, classic painting and put it into my work too. So, what is that? I basically have four different styles created about by seven principles that I'm going to share. In reality, there's probably about 25 principles, but we only got an hour here. So I'm just going to go with the top seven and go from there. And if you have a bunch of questions to feel free to ask later on too. Okay, so let's go on the tools first. What do I actually use? So right now, I love using the Sony A9 for the global shutter and a Sony A7 R5. Now, I usually like to use two cameras of the same, just because the dials and the menu and everything is the same. Why don't I have two Sony A9 threes? Well, if I brought home two Sony A9 threes, I think my wife would kill me. So because those A93s aren't exactly cheap. So I'm gonna have to wait a little bit, and then I'm gonna sell the A7R5 and get two Sony A9s, or not less by that time. Sony might have another camera with global shutter. Maybe I'll have that. But I definitely want to go to two cameras that have global shutter. I use a strong video light. I use different brands there. I use Godox. I use Stella lights. I use Zhiyun. So there's different brands out there. I love using the new Sony, not the, I guess it's kind of new. I use a Sony flash now, which I never used before. You know why? It's because it syncs with the global shutter. And I'll talk a little bit about that and why that's important. I love using this 42-inch umbrella softbox that's super portable that I can bring around and put together very easily. Also a 33-inch, just a basic translucent umbrella when I want to go really, really, really fast. I use that. And that's about it. And I just want you to know, like some people like go, hey, I thought you used this. I thought you used that. Well, guess what? Technology changes constantly. So my gear will also change. I wouldn't be surprised if next month I use something different. I mean, technology is going at a rapid rate, and I like to stay abreast on what's going to help me produce my signature look. And so that's what I'm using right now. Okay, so here is number 1 of 7. You gotta master the lighting fundamentals. Okay. And part of that is really understanding the exposure triangle. And exposure, as we know, is controlled by aperture, shutter, and ISO. And why is that so important? Because when it comes to using lighting and flash, especially, you have to put your camera in manual mode. So you have to know how to get your exposure, not by the automatic settings in your camera, like not like Running Man and night photography mode. You got to pull it off that and put it in manual mode and individually control your shutter, aperture, and ISO in order to use a lot of lighting to get it down the way you want it. And there are shutter limitations according to the flash that you use. So let's say you are arriving at the exposure and you're at, 1/3000th of a second, and then you're using a particular flash and you can't go above 1/250th of a second. So you got to recompute all your settings to get that right exposure that you want by changing your shutter speed. And you got to do it like quickly. You got to do it within literally seconds. And you can't be thinking about it. And because in the real world, when you're on the job, you got to know it inside out like the back of your hand. So you got to realize too, that what really controls your flash power is the f-stop and the ISO. And to a certain extent, shutter does and it doesn't, depending on what type of flash system that you use. So let's go over the 5 different portable flash types that you might run into. And this gets to be a little bit complicated if you don't understand these 5 different types. The first one is what I call the basic manual / auto. And a lot of these were made like in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And basically the flash power is controlled on the flash. So you have to, there's no transmitter that can change the power of it. You have to literally walk over to flash and change it. And it has a limitation where you can't shoot really above 1/200th of a second on your shutter speed. And instead of TTL, they have this cool, now you can find these flashes used for, I found one literally the other day just for the heck of it. I went on eBay. I found it for like $10. So you still could do some amazing work with it. And they're like super inexpensive. I'm sure B&H has got their used department filled with some of these suckers. But they have this auto. And so there was a little sensor. They didn't have TTL back then, but they had this thing called auto, and they have a little sensor built onto the flash. And you would tell it, okay, I'm at this f-stop at this ISO, and they have a little dial that you would give you only certain options on what you could do. And then it will figure out the light for you. And that was the best that they had to TTL. They had this thing called auto, but you could still use that today. Okay. And so then there's the basic TTL flash, and you're limited to 1/200th of a second or slower to use with it. Okay. And so that's another type of flash. Usually the basic TTL flash will also enable you to do manual, but sometimes not. Okay, then you have the high speed sync only manual flash. Okay, and so what that allows you now to do is, okay, I can use flash instead of 1/200th of a second, I could use it all the way up to 1/8000th of a second. But if you do, it will drastically reduce the power at high shutter speeds. So you just have to know that. So your flash is really not as powerful as advertised if you're in high speed sync mode, but it will allow you to use high shutter speeds just in case if you're in a bright light and you want to use low f-stops. Okay, and then they have the high speed sync TTL and manual, which costs a little bit more. So each of these kind of flashes keep going up in price. Okay, and so these are the ones that most people get. I kind of don't recommend them because when you do both TTL and manual and you put all those different settings on a flash, it is super complicated. You hit one little button, it turns it into a different mode. And there's all these different options on the dial and this and that. And it's really hard to navigate around, especially if you're not using your flash every single week. You pull it out once every 6 months or few months, you may get very messed up on the job because there's so many buttons and dials. Okay, then now there is the fifth type of flash, which Sony is the only one that has it, and it's the global shutter. I can use, without reducing the strength of my flash, I could use it all the way up to 1/80,000th of a second, which basically, which I'll show a little bit later, that means that you could multiply your flash power by 100 times. This is revolutionary. This is the future. And the things that you can do with this is amazing. And can't wait to show you. Okay, so that's number one. Really master the basics, you should be able to use all 5 types of those different flashes and know how to do it. Okay, that's how good you should know things. And you really have to understand. And once you master one flash and know it inside and out and know how to control the power, know how to control the light on the background, all that stuff, once you master one flash, you can master 1,000 flashes at once. So the key is just get one down and then you can add on to that. Okay, so now I was thinking about this. And I was looking at other people's work, and maybe they're not as experienced. And I'm like, why aren't they getting that quality results? And the thing is because they're choosing the wrong backgrounds on doing a certain technique. And choosing the right background is really key in getting a great shot. And I have this saying, a subject well lit on an average background is still average. And so that's what's happening. They could like get this amazing softbox and flash and put the light just right on the subject, but then the background that they choose is not great. And so you therefore still ends up into an average image. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to show you what I look for when choosing a background. And the number one thing is backlight. Give me some backlight, because the backlight, there's just something about the sun or the appearance of light coming in a strong way to your environment that makes it so kind of romantic and interesting. Okay, and so you choosing like backlight to light your subjects just makes it really sing. Then there's blue skies. If you ever see a nice blue sky with clouds, you gotta use it because it's one of the most amazing backdrops to have is the sky. It doesn't actually have to be a blue sky. It could be a sunset sky that looks awesome. But look to your sky. If you see amazing sky, use it. Okay, and here's some blue sky too. Actually, here's the photo that we chose for this. And actually, interesting. Of course, I'm using flash. Now, I'll get this a little sidebar note. Okay, so whenever you pose a couple and you don't know where to put the light, you can never go wrong by just making it soft light, like put it through a diffuser, an umbrella, or a softbox box and put it directly above the subject, like a lamp is coming down on it in the middle. If you do that, no matter what you're doing with a couple, it will always look fine. And so that's your go-to. It when confused, you're shooting a couple and you want to get good lighting and you don't know what to do, always just put it in the middle, on top, down. You're going to get a great picture. Now, why this shot looks extra good is you don't know it, but there's a white ceiling that's an overhang. And so I did have the light up above. I did have it through an umbrella, but it was also hitting the ceiling that was above them and coming down on them, giving even more soft light. So it was like, I mean, sometimes things just work out, right? I didn't plan it, but hey, it looks good. Okay, here's another thing. Look for glowing trees. So when the sun is coming through the trees, it makes the leaves glow, and that is an amazing backdrop. So if you look for that, you can find that. Literally, this tree, I was in Detroit when I was doing this workshop, and this was literally a parking lot right next to the parking lot. If you would have saw where this was, it was like, you're gonna shoot there. But hey, that's where the good light was. That's where the glowing trees were, and we used it, and it's like amazing. So look for that. And then here we are. Derek would recognize this place. This is in Central Park. And what am I looking for? Look at those glowing leaves and branches behind the subject. And so when I see that, I'm going, okay, I'm going to use that as my backdrop. Guaranteed good shot. Now, also, when you're indoors, look for lights. Lights are always key and add interest into the story. So background lights are key. And part of using background lights indoors to make it look cool is using a low f-stop. So you get those lights and you get those bulbs that get to be really blurred out and big. So if you use a longer lens and a lower f-stop and you zoom in on your subject, those lights get bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's something to remember. And so I love looking for lights wherever I am. I love looking for them. I blur out the background and it's like an amazing backdrop. So I'm just look for those lights. That's huge. And when I'm indoors, that's like the number one thing that I look for is lights. Okay, outdoors, if you see those lights, right? This is in Chicago underneath. We're probably going to be about run over any second here, but we're right in the middle of the street. But I love those kind of leading lines and those lights and how she's kind of set up by the archway. And I've looked for that type of thing. Here I'm in Paris. And you see repetitive highlight and shadow. Do you guys see that on the columns? Whenever you see repetitive highlight and shadow, it's guaranteed awesome shot, guaranteed. So if you can see it and use it in your background, and then especially if you just blur it out, it looks really cool. And it doesn't have to be columns all the time. It could be something like sheets, anything with texture on it. And camera that is off camera lighting will give you this type of repetitive highlight and shadow. Add it in your photos and looks good. Here's the trees right here. It's in Japan here. And you can kind of see the sun coming through, giving you that repetitive highlight and shadow. And then here, I had to create the repetitive highlight and shadow. I'm in Hawaii, and it's this awesome place where they have these, what they call banyan trees with these kind of roots coming down from the tree, which are really, really awesome. And so I was shooting in this area and the light was completely flat. There was no shadow at all. And I go, I got to get the texture out of these trees. And so I set up just a simple flash off the camera left up high, lighting up the trees and giving those trees side light so I could get that repetitive highlight and shadow to make it look interesting. Okay, now what you also want to look for are leading lines. And sometimes you have to take a different camera angle to take them. And a lot of times I'm shooting up towards the sky to get those leading lines. And so this is a very attractive way to bring attention to your subject through these lines. Um, and it doesn't have to be structures, it could be even mountains. And so you look for these things that will center your subject. I'm going to talk about this picture a little bit later too. Okay. And look at here in Vegas, right? And we're doing a photo walk there. And I'm like, hey, where should I go to do this workshop, right? What's interesting around here? And so I found these lights. They have amazing lights in Vegas, and you know for sure you're going to get a great shot when you see lights like that. And so part of the leading lines, it also shows depth. I hate doing those shots where I'll do it once in a while, where the subject is pressed right up against a backdrop because as being an environmental portrait artist, you need to show depth. You need to give a sense of where you are. And it's always more interesting when you have depth in your images and you need to look for that, right? And even if you get into elevated places, this is on top of the Sony building, which is pretty cool. We had special access to go shoot up there, and now you look at the depth that you can see. So if you, a lot of times you take a higher angle, you could get that depth and add it into your photos. It's going to make it a lot interesting. Okay, now let's get into it. So we talked about all the different, choosing your background is super important. Now we're going to actually get into doing it, right? And the different methods. And so you want to combine the artificial light and the ambient light to give you a look that looks really great. And the first method to do is the equal matching technique, meaning that the exposure on the subject is somewhat equal to the background exposure. And so when you have both of those equal, you see everything, right? And it gives you a sense of you're there, right there, okay? And it looks natural. And so let's get into a little bit on how to do this. Now, look at this photo. I'm in the subway, okay? And so what do? I set the background exposure first, and then I add light to the subject because I can't individually light up the car, right? So I have to, what did I do? I looked at the lights and I determined the exposure that I needed. And then my subjects, I probably could have shot them, but my signature style is adding a little bit of light on my subjects so they slightly pop off from the background. And also you get more detail and more color when you and a catch light when you add a little bit of light. So here I am here shooting it with a 24mm lens at 1.6 and at ISO 1600. And you go, Scott, why did you have to turn the ISO up so high? Couldn't you just, you're up at 320. You could have turned your ISO up down lower, right? If I wanted to. Well, I don't know if you've ever been on a subway, but it's moving. And so I wanted to make sure, because I'm using constant light here, I wanted to make sure that my subjects were sharp and I was freezing action. So I had to keep my shutter somewhat high Okay, not 500th with I would like, but it's the 320 should be pretty good. Now, I wanted to get the ambiance of what it looked like in that subway car. And so therefore, I had to keep bringing up my ISO to make it look like how my eyes were seeing it. And so I had to bring that ISO up a little bit higher. Now, what's interesting is I made this chart a long time ago, and it measures how much flash power that you need according to what settings you have. And there's probably a million of these guides floating around because I developed this guide in like 2010, and it went viral and everybody started using them. And so I get people like 10 years later coming up to me, Scott, I still use your flash guide. Look at it. And they have it taped onto their flash or they have it in their wallet or whatever. It's crazy. But I updated it a little bit for a global shutter. Okay, because let's look at these settings. What if I was using a flash here, right? And I'm going to show you why flash doesn't work for this image. Because if you were to look at the settings over there to the left, you would have to set your flash at 1/1000th power. Now, I don't know any flash that goes down that low. And so the reason why I get the look that I get is because I know right now a lot of you don't own any high quality video lights. And if you don't own a video light, you can't get this look on an image. Okay, so I'm going to spank you a little bit if you don't own a video light, because if you want to have shoot in low light, you gotta have something that produces very, 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 very low light, which a video light does. And so it can go really low and you can just kiss your subject with light. And so that's the reason why some of you can't get this good look like this, is because you don't own a decent video light. And I would say, I teach every other week people somewhere, and I would say like maybe even 50% of the photographers out there don't own a decent video light. Well, it's like I can't even do my job if I don't have it. In fact, I'm swaying more towards using video light because they're getting stronger and stronger than flash. I still could use flash once in a while, but still, video light is a must. Okay, so here I am using a video light. So what do? What's my process? I set the background, right? I can't light up that Chicago sign, so I have to get it in camera. So I set my exposure to that Chicago sign to make sure it looks the way I want to. My subjects are actually in the dark there. They're actually, without that video light, they are completely dark. You barely can see them. And then I just use a video light through an umbrella. This is just a simple 33-inch umbrella to light my subject. And I just turn it on, and it's like what you see is what you get. So if it's too bright, you turn it down. If it's not bright enough, you turn it up. And that's how easy it is. And I just adjust to taste. And so here I'm using a video light. You can see my settings here. ISO 1600, right? And so it just needs a little bit of light on my subject. I don't need to use flash. I was out doing this workshop, okay, and I would see people at night bringing out their AD600, and I'm like, bro, that's a wrong choice. That puts out so much light that at the nighttime you don't need it. It won't even get down low enough. Sometimes I'll bring my 8200 and I'm like, this don't work because it's too bright. Even the 8200 is too bright for me. And sometimes flash is too bright. So that's why I use a video light. Okay, here's another image that I want to talk about, how a lot of photographers just learning flash would really screw this image up. Okay, and so if you look at this image, you'll notice that I just kissed it with a little itty bit of light. And what a lot of photographers like to do, especially when they first learn flash, to go, oh, I'm going to do those dramatic shots and I'm going to make this subject, I'm going to get my little snoot on there and I'm going to get the subject really bright and make everything dark behind it. Well, in this case, when you're shooting an overcast, if I made my background darker than it is now, you would lose all the detail in the mountains and it would just look like a black glob out there. And that's what happens. is they don't balance that light and realize they just need to kiss the light and just with a little bit of light. And so you can see I'm shooting this with a 50 millimeter 1.2 lens. Okay. And it doesn't need that much light at all. Okay. So, one, common mistakes: you don't own a video light. Okay. Because sometimes you just need to kiss that light on the subject, and that's what it is. And two, you just overdo it with the flash power on your subjects and you make the background too dark, especially if there's not a lot of light on the background. Now, if it was full sun and there was a bright light on the mountains, then yeah, you could use bright light on your subjects, but there's not a lot of light on the mountains because it's overcast. So just put a little bit of light on your subjects to match it. Okay, now here's again, I love the texture in the background. So I chose, ooh, she's wearing black. I'm going to pop her with the yellow and have it contrast. And let's kind of look at the setup here. So I'm shooting with the 16-35 2.8, and here's my settings. So if I were to use a flash in this case, I would have to put my flash at 1/128th power. Okay, now I'm putting it through an umbrella, so I'm losing 2 stops. So I'd have to up it to about 1/32nd power with my flash, which is hardly anything at all. And when you're at 1/32nd power, 1/64th power, that is the perfect time just to use a video light instead. And so that's what I'm using here. I'm just using a little video light for that catch light, but I'm not overpowering it. I'm just adding just a little bit to take the shadows away from the subject, to make it look good. And that's what I do a lot of times, is I'm just adding a little bit of light, not overdoing it. Let's take a look at this picture here where I'm exposing. This is in New York, and I'm exposing for this tunnel and the lights in here, and that's not a lot of light, right? So the equivalent here of what I would need, oops, sorry, is because I'm shooting a 50 millimeter lens at ISO 1600, at ISO 200. If I were to use a flash, all I would need is 1/256 power. And so, and if I'm in that range, I'm going to use my video light instead of my flash. Now, if I'm all the way up and I need 1/16th power, 1/2 power, full power, I can't use my video light. It's not strong enough. But here, almost any video light can do this. And it just takes away a little bit of the shadow and gives some detail and sharpness and adds a little bit of punch to the colors on the subjects, the clothing and all that kind of stuff, makes the makeup come out a little bit better. And so again, I'm just matching exposures from the background on the subject, making it about the same. Sorry for the noise here. Can I take that off? Okay. So here I am using a flash indoors, and I love using this 42-inch softbox that I'm doing. And that's the image on the left. Now, I want to explain a little bit what some photographers would do. Now, you notice up at the top, you go, oh, Scott, you didn't stop down your camera settings enough because you don't quite get the rich colors on that stained glass on the top there. Why did you do that? Right? And so I did that first. I went up there and I go, oh, I got to get that stained glass in. And then I realized when I made that stain, because it's bright sun, we're in Cuba. Okay, so that sun is shining on that stained glass. Now I realized that stained glass, when I set it so it looks really good, the background of those buildings becomes way too dark and you don't see the detail. Now, with my flashes, could I light up those buildings back there? Maybe I could, but would I even want to? No. So my background is set in camera. And so sometimes we always hear, oh, set the background first, set the background first, set the back. Okay, so you have to evaluate the different light brightnesses in the background, and you don't want to set it so dark that you don't leave the detail in a majority of the image. And so, yeah, I could set it so the stained glass is really nice and dark and everything, but then the behind her would look completely dark and it would look terrible. You couldn't see the ambience of the place. So, so what I did was they call plate shooting, right? So I did shoot, I'm just kind of lazy. I did shoot it with the stained glass looking perfect, and then you can cut and paste it and put it back in so it looks amazing. But I didn't do that because I wanted to show this concept where you've got to evaluate your background and know how far to push your exposure, how far to underexpose it. And sometimes you don't want to expose it too much because you're going to lose the detail in everything else. Okay. So here's the camera settings. I'm shooting with a 20 millimeter 1.8 lens. And I would really only need about 1/64th power on my flash to do it, but that's straight without the softbox. So the softbox, I added 2 more stops of light. So literally I'm about at 1/16th power here to get this shot. Okay, now I'm going to blow your mind. I'm doing a whole lecture on this, but I just want to briefly talk about the global shutter. Now, some of you in Vegas were here with me doing this, and this is going to literally blow your mind. Okay, so are you ready for mind blown? Okay, look at this shot. Okay, this is straight out of camera. This is not any editing at all. I just put it on here and I want to demonstrate them. Here's my camera settings. I'm shooting at 28 millimeters at 2.8 at 1/80,000th of a second. No, not 1/8,000, 1/80,000th of a second. And my flash is syncing perfectly with it without losing 1 ounce of power or doing high speed sync. And I bumped up my ISO to 800 because why? Your flash power is controlled by, what did I say? Your f-stop and your ISO. So if I turn my ISO up, it makes my flash even more powerful. So if I were to just do this with a normal camera, this is the camera settings that you would have to do to get this type of look. You'd have to be at f22, 1/156th of a second at ISO 100 with a 42-inch softbox, and I gather with my estimation, it's like using a 400-watt flash at full power. Now with global shutter, let's look at the chart. Shutter doesn't matter. So I can darken the scene with my shutter, okay? I could ramp it all the way up to 80,000 to get rid of a lot of that ambient light. And now if you look at 2.8 at ISO 100, the flash power needed to light this subject up is only 1/256 power. But of course, I put it through a softbox. Oh, wow. I lost 2 more stops. Oh my gosh. I guess I have to put my small little tiny flash to 1/64th power, completely overpowering the sun. Now, guess what? I have 50 witnesses to this fact actually doing it because I was teaching this and I was letting them use my camera. They put their own SD card in there so they could get this shot. And this is mind blowing. I'm going to do a whole lecture on this concept of global shutter. I swear Sony doesn't teach this right. They came out with the concept of global shutter, but people don't realize what the advantage is. The advantage is it makes your freaking flash at least 100 times more powerful. That's why it's amazing. That's what I mentioned this to the Sony team 10 years ago, why they got to do this, because I said it would revolutionize the whole entire lighting industry. As you can tell, I'm getting a little bit excited right now. And it will, because this is utterly amazing. So anyways, global shutter is the future, but I'm got to talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about another important concept that I do that nobody else does and how people are kind of getting wrong. Now, you could look at this photo and say, Scott, oh my gosh, okay, I'm using an umbrella here. I'm using a Godox 8300 and I have it about half power, okay? And you're going, Scott, you're using flash here. but you blew out the background. Why did you do that? Okay, it's the same thing. When I'm looking at a scene, I'm evaluating the glow. That's more important to me. That's the cinematic style, is how are your subjects glowing with the backlight? That's more important to me than overpowering the sun. Okay. And so if I were to make my shutter speed higher or my f-stop higher to get that darker sky, guess what would happen to these trees? It would look completely dark and there would be no glow. There would be no glow kind of around them. There, and so you lose the glow. So here's a very important fact that hardly anybody ever tells you, because they always tell you, oh, set the background first or set the light to the things that you can't control. Okay, here's what I do. I set the exposure according to the desired glow. I could always add in a bit of sky later if I wanted to, with AI and all that makes it easy. But the glow is hard to recreate. So I'm always looking for the glow. I set it according to the glow and then I light my subjects. But the glow is the most important thing. Here's the same thing. So what if I blow out the background and I added a sky back there because I blew it out? Why? Because I'm setting the exposure because I just want that glow around her beautiful red hair. If I underexposed it and I did get the sky in, which I could have got the blue sky in, there would be no glow because you underexposed it too much. So that's what I do. That's what I do. I realize I do this. I think that's why people, when I'm on a workshop, they're always asking me what my settings is, which is a pet peeve. I hate it when people ask me what my camera settings are, because that should be like basic, or you should just learn to try to figure it out. But a reason why is because I just realized they might be setting it for the background and trying to get a nice blue sky, and I'm setting it for the glow, so it looks totally different than their shot. And so I realized that technique, really, that's what I do. And I do blow out a lot of skies. I just add it later. Okay. But my signature style is looking for that glow. And so when I get that glow in, the light needed on my subject is not that much. And so therefore it has that ambiguous look to it, like, oh, what are you using? Video light? Using natural light? Using right? Because it doesn't look flashy, because I'm not underexposing my background a lot. I'm just going for that glow. Here again, same thing. I'm shooting up towards the sky. I see the glow. It's like very high sky. And I'm setting my exposure for the glow, how I want those trees to look, how I want that light to kind of surround and outlight him, you know, kind of outline him with that rim light. And I'm figuring out how much glow do I want. And then I just add the light to the subject to get the detail, to get some kind of contrast in what he's wearing. So I'm setting the glow first. Here, I had to create the glow because she was completely in the shade. And so what I did was I took an 8200 to get that glow and I fired it behind her. And I remember this wedding, even though it was a long time ago, I think I originally set my flash at 1/2 power, thinking I would need a lot. But because I was in the shade, I'm using the 8200, I think I only had it at 1/16 power. And so that light behind her made her veil completely glow around the little girl. And I really love the picture. I don't care if the veil's blown out, honestly, because what am I looking for? I want the glow on her face. That's the most important thing to me, is the glow on that little girl's face. If I would have put the exposure to the veil so you could see every detail of the veil, then the little girl's face wouldn't glow the way I wanted it to. And so that, to me, the most important part is that glow around the face. Okay, now here's another thing that you could do. Whenever you have a window in the presence of your subject, you can overexpose it as much as you want and it will look okay because it's if sun's coming in. And so here, this was a completely overcast day. I will show you, right? And so what we did was I started putting flash behind there to give it that look through the window as if it was sun, but really it was just an overcast day, but I wanted to give it that feeling like there was sun coming through. Okay, here's also windows. And so what did I do? I exposed it to the glow that I wanted. Did I care that I blew out everything in the windows and you can't see the tree? I don't care because to me, the glow is the most important thing of the photo. And then I just used a little video light on his face to get the detail and to get the catch light, as you can see in his eyes. Added video light for face detail. Did the same thing here. This was in Italy, and I put her by the window and I overexposed the shot until I saw the glow on her face. And I kept on overexposing, overexposing. I saw the glow on her face. I go, I like that. And then I added a little bit of video light on her dress to pop in the detail. Okay. And so but what was first? I set according to the glow. Did I really care that I blew out the background? I mean, this photo has been published in a lot of different national and international magazines. They obviously love the shot. And so they didn't care I blew out the background, right? But to get the detail on her beautiful dress, I used a video light to bring back the detail. Okay. All right, so let's talk about that. Let's go into that's number 4 principle. Let's go to number 5 for doing fashion type of work. And I love using direct flash. And so when you do fashion, fashion is a lot of detail, it's a lot of sharpness, and you could use direct flash. And you kind of want to take away all the shadows to make it give that commercial look. And you can even look at the horse. He looks amazing because he's getting some lighting too. And so the horse looks amazing and the subject looks amazing. And let me show you the little setup that I'm doing here. And so we all taken our bare flash and we're just firing it. Even though the direct sun was on the subject, it still leaves a bit of shadow here and there. So I love using my flash to just take away all the shadows to give it that fashion forward feel to it. And you can see some other images that I'm doing using this same technique. Expose for the background, right? You see a big, beautiful sky, and then you're just adding flash to take out some of the small shadows on the subject. And look at even the horse looks amazing. I keep on, these horses were great, but I love doing this in Cuba. We had a great time doing this. Okay, now also you don't have to use a flash. Now here I'm using a reflector. Okay, now this is the magic of AI because I saw the wings and I go, ooh, that looks like it should be in the desert. But actually, it was in Melrose Street in Los Angeles. But we used a reflector. So instead of a flash, a lot of times you could just use a reflector, even if you don't even own a flash, or a flash is too complicated to you and you're in bright sun and you want that fashion feel to it. You could get put the subject behind the sun, use a reflector, make it light evenly, and you will get that kind of fashion feel to it. Okay, now getting close to the end here. We're at 6 rules. And now I know a lot of you, when you love to shoot flash, you love to use those dark backgrounds, right? Now, I'm going to show you how to do it, but how to do it the right way so it doesn't look like, oh, you're just lighting up the subject and then everything behind it looks completely dark. I'm going to give you some rules on when and how to use a very dark background. So take notes, okay? First one is use a snoot. You know what a snoot is? So do I show it? I think I show it a little bit later. So what was the steps on this? It's in a kind of a dark, it's indoors. So I'm exposing for the lights in the background. So I'm getting those the way the glow that I want those lights to look. Okay. I want those lights in the background to have a certain glow to it. So I set my exposure to that. She's completely dark at this point. Okay. But I got the glow on the background. Then I snoot the face. So I just got a little light directly just at the face, and then everything else is dark. I go, well, Scott, and if you light the face like that, then everything is going to be dark. How are you going to get the detail in her dress? Because she's wearing black too, on top of that. Well, I use another light through an umbrella that's softer and wider, and I just turn it on to open up the details in the rest of the couch and on her dress. So I'm using two different types of lighting here. Here's my camera settings, right? So I have a snoot that's just right on the face to give me that look. And then I use another video light through an umbrella to open up the body part, but I make it lower in exposure level, lower intensity than the face, because the face is always the brightest, right? And so the rule is your eye goes to whatever's brightest and sharpest. And so if you make the face the brightest part, they're going to look at that first, and that's what you want. And so I use this technique a lot, and I love it. And here's the same thing. I'm outdoors, and so I have a little snoot right on the subject's eyes. And then what's lighting up his body? Is another flash or video light going through an umbrella to light up his body. Did the same thing here to give that different look. And I love doing this technique. And then when you do that, when you snoot the face and you light the body, you can make that background really, 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 really dark. It's just that you don't, if there's a lot of details back there, you just don't want to you want to make sure that you still see the details, and that's important. That's the camera settings. I'm using global shutter. Look at my shutter speed, 12,800. Okay. That's insane because I'm trying to make it really, really dark. Okay. So here's another one where I didn't really use a snoot, but I used what they call a strip reflector. So what you could do is take a mirror and then just tape off everything. So there's just a little strip of mirror showing. So I had a video light behind the subject shining right into my little strip reflector, and it shines just a little bit of light on the eyes. And so therefore, with one light, I get a backlight and I get a little front light that gives you that kind of snooted look. And you can make the dark ground very dark. I recommend just adding some bright spots in there just so it doesn't look all completely dark. Now, if you're in a dark setting, let's say you're shooting here. So I'm at this workshop and they got this studio, which was pretty awesome. And you're in a really, really dark environment like that. The best way to light your subject is just to snoot them, because you don't want their whole entire body lit. Like if I took a flash and I lit her whole entire body, without any kind of shadow, it would look like it doesn't match. So I'm trying to match the environment, because the light is just kind of snooty on everything. Then you put the same kind of light on your subject and to match the environment. I did the same thing here. I'm in the studio. I had these cool lasers, and we just took the video light out with the snoot, and I just lit the face. But as you notice, you can still see his shirt, even though he's wearing a black shirt. I didn't expose it, or I didn't post-process it where I lost that detail of that shirt and was just a black glob. So even though you're doing these dark backgrounds, make sure that you still can see the detail of the darks. Okay. And so now that's one technique, is using a snoot. Here's the second one. If you want to create a dark background, use side light. Put the light to the side and the nose goes towards the light. And so here I'm side lighting my subject, and then I have another video light that's going in back of the water to light that up behind her. But I can make it everything dark here and it looks good. See, side light. If you use side light, you can make the background almost as dark as you want it. Here's another side light photo. Okay, here I am in Hawaii. It was completely overcast. The subjects looked completely flat. And then because there's no light on the subject, you couldn't get a reflection. So if you're in flat light like this and you want a reflection on the ground and you want it to appear to look as if the sun was shining on the subject, I took my little video light, I put it camera left off to the side, and I've used side light, and I could create this moody shot by doing the side light. If I did front light, it wouldn't work as well. It wouldn't be as believable. But because there's a lot of shadow on the more shadow you put on your subject, the more darker you can have your background. So that's a real, that's a rule that you can use. It's important when you're doing this. How dark do I make the background? That's the question now. Well, you want to still keep detail in the dark. So if you look behind the subject and you see the dark areas, you could still see that I keep detail in there, or I post-process that back in. So when I keep in mind that I don't want to make it so dark so that when I go into post-processing, there's no detail there. So I err a little bit on the overexposed side and make it darker because I want to make sure I keep that detail in the darks. Okay, here's another side light, right? And I'm using short side lighting, meaning that the shadow is the closest to the camera. And to get short side lighting, if you put the light off to the side, all you got to do is put the nose to the light and you always get short side lighting. That's it. Just put the nose to the light, put the light off to the side. You always get short side lighting. And then that short side lighting, you could make those dark backgrounds darker. Here's another one here, side light, same thing. Okay. So here's another one. And this is very compelling because they got leading lines, right? And I'm using side light. I could make that background dark as I want pretty much. I'll darken it down until I start to lose detail in the darks, and then I'll back it off a little bit, and that's as dark as I go. Or if I want it super dark and I can post-process some of that detail back in with a brush or whatever, then I'll do that too. Okay, side light, again, if you got side light, you could go as dark as you want, but it'll still look natural. I'm going to end pretty soon. Okay, so here's another thing that you can do is rim light. If you use rim light, you can make your dark grounds dark. Okay, that's another rule that you could do. Rim light, you can make it dark, but I'm still keeping detail in my background. Rim light, they're holding a video light behind them, and I'm making it all dark, and it still looks good. Now, here's another rule if you want a dark background. If your subject is wearing dark clothes, you have the liberty of making it dark. And so they're wearing dark clothes, and I made it very dark, and I could show you the post-processing later. Here she's wearing a dark fur coat, and I made the background dark. I just put a purple video light against the backdrop to match the dress. And so here you could see they're wearing dark. I could take that background and I can make it dark, but I'm not losing the detail in the darks. You go dark until you don't lose the details. Same thing here. You see I'm making it dark, but you see the feathers. You still see the feathers, and it's still detail, but making it dark. Okay, the last tip. This is the last 30 seconds here. Post-processing is huge with that I do. And that's the reason why it looks, because I light shape with my post-processing. Okay, so here's the photo that I took. I really like it, but it's crappy. Why? Do the dark test. Make everything dark. Take the exposure level in Lightroom or whatever and turn it down. If you turn it down, that shows you your eye goes to what's brightest first. So your eye is not going on the subject. It's going on the backlight behind them and the little light off to the side, right? And so you got to take down all those things in the red, and in the green, you got to bring up. So you have to reshape the entire lighting in post-processing because you screwed up and you did, well, later I did put the light over to get it right once I realized I liked this shot. But I'm just doing this to demonstrate the power of post-processing. And so light needs to be rebalanced, but you could do it through post-processing. Okay, so here's the before, and then here's the after, right? So you reshape the light, and I do this a lot. But because you didn't see if you didn't see the before, you would it would look natural somewhat to you. And I do that a lot. I reshape everything. So here's that picture before, but she's wearing dark, so it gives me the liberty to darken down the back too. Now, I wish I had the light more off to the side. It would look even better. The light on her, I don't really, it's too flat in my, but I'm teaching a class and I got to let 20 other people shoot. So I didn't really get the lighting right. But because she's wearing dark, you have the liberty to bring everything down. Here's the same thing here. I shot this. I didn't underexpose it too much because the plane is dark and I didn't want to lose the detail in the plane. And so, but because everything is dark, it gives me the liberty to bring everything down and add a sky, but I still have the detail in the darks. Okay, one more photo. We're going to be ending here. I know I'm running out of time. And so here it is. Same thing. Scott, you're using a flash here. I'm using a AD400, I believe. How come you didn't make the sky darker? Well, if I would have made the sky darker, then all that detail in the plane, right, is going to get super, super, super dark, and it's going to be too dark. So I go according to the darkness of the detail, and then I add my flash, and then in post, I reshape the light to give it that kind of fine art feel and reshape everything there. All right. So anyways, before I summarize, I'm going to Cuba October 3rd to 9th. If you're interested in going, I'd love to have you. I got 2 spots left. Contact me if you're interested, or you can go to that link to find more about it. Let me give you the summary of the 7 things. Master the fundamentals. Choose interesting backgrounds. You got to use the equal matching technique where the light on the subject matches the background. Set your exposure according to glow, which is the most important thing. Direct flash for fashion. I gave you all those different rules for creating dark backgrounds, and then your post-processing for light shaping. And we are done. So I can hand everything back over to Derek, and I wonder if he's got any questions or if we have any time. I know I'm a few minutes over. But does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we got time for a couple questions. Start it right here. You mentioned you don't know how more people don't have a good video light. Dave's asking, what is a decent video light?
For some reason, I can't hear anybody. Did my sound mess up? Right.
Check.
What's going on? Uh-oh. Did I totally? Oh, here I am.
Got it? Can you hear us?
How come I can't hear you?
I don't know. Danny's telling me he hears me. Let's see. Did you mute anything when you replayed the video? Did you mute the computer sound?
I can't hear you right now. Headphones. Turn up volume. Oh, no. I can't hear you. Anybody.
Check.
Oh, there you go. Gotcha.
There you go. You got me?
Gotcha. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Awesome. So Dave wanted to know, what is a decent video light? You mentioned everybody should have one.
Okay. I use different ones. I use a Stella Pro Light Reflex, which is great. I also use a Zhiyun like C100, which is really good. And then I also use a Godox. They have one, and I would say, 60 watts and above, or above 7,000 lumens. That's gonna be the magic number. Anything bigger than that is greater than that would work. And you want to be able to you don't necessarily need to overpower the sun. It's nice if you can, but as long as you can light it in shade, I think that's as strong as you need the video light. And basically that's the same power as, let's say, 1/32 to maybe 1/16 power on a flash. Okay, so a flash is 100 times stronger than a video light. And then with global shutter, the global shutter makes it 100 times stronger on top of that. So, but you need the video light to get that lower end when you just need to put a little bit of light on your subject. It's necessary.
Okay,
Uh,
so that's going to be more for just the times you just want a little. You need a
if you're
little something.
indoors, definitely if you're indoors and if you're in shade, uh, then I use that.
Okay, so the people that like shooting wide open, I think would probably lean more towards a constant light. Would you say, like the people
Yeah,
that?
yes, for sure. Especially if you're indoors, constant light. Like if I'm indoors, I'm all video light. I basically put the flash away once I'm indoors. Or
Okay,
here's a rule: when you're indoors, or when the sun goes below the horizon, you don't need your flash anymore.
okay.
Just go all
Tim
video light.
Tim is asking if you ever use a light meter.
No,
Okay,
because how can a light meter tell me the glow that I want? Right? If I'm metering for glow, a light meter won't tell me that. My eyes will. So
yeah.
that's why I don't use a light meter, because I am going, like, not every shot is a formula, right? It's about the feel and the look that you want with it. And so I'm not going to be traditional. I'm going to blow out the background sometimes because I want the glow. And the light meter doesn't know that. And so, therefore, that's why this thing takes years of mastering this lighting, of understanding, hey, you just don't use a formula and do this. No, you use your eyes and you use, like, what do I want this to look like?
And I think that's what makes your work so successful and emotive for me is when you were talking about the out of focus, like the trees in the background. Not many people, everybody's so like, okay, well, the background has to be perfectly, or evenly exposed. And I'm like, well, no, it doesn't. Cause, yeah, it wouldn't have hit the same if you had underexposed the trees. If you
Right.
don't have the specular highlight, the all that bokeh
Well,
coming through
because
there.
when you're looking at it, you don't see a super dark background, right?
Yeah.
That actually looks opposite of what your eye actually sees. So if you want to have something that looks true to life, we see the glow, right?
Mhm.
And so that's what I want to represent in my photography a lot of times, is what we actually see.
Okay. We'll sneak one last one question in here. People are asking about in-person workshops. Michael says, your work is amazingly beautiful and inspirational. Other than Cuba, any in-person workshops coming up?
Tomorrow, I am going to Seattle. So if you're up in the Seattle area, I'm doing some free workshops up there. So, I'm everywhere. So if you go to scottrobertstudio.com, every other week I'm speaking somewhere. I'm doing a lot here
Mhm.
online, and then I have a lot of workshops of my own, and then I speak for a lot of camera stores. So I'm all over the place.
Do you do mentoring, Scott, for the
Yes, I
people that
do.
are interested? Okay.
I do. So they can contact me directly about that, and I can evaluate that's actually the best learning, is I get to see their work, evaluate where they're great at, what they need help with, and then I can fine tune a lesson plan. Here's your next steps. And now that I've recorded over 50 hours of content, I don't have to teach. I could say, oh, look at this lecture on using one light. And then I don't have to spend time teaching. Now that I have that, it works perfectly with the mentoring too.
Awesome.
So
Well,
everything that I know is on this, like, DVD of 50 hours of not DVD, of this hard drive. And so now I can offer that for people too. And it works well with the mentoring.
perfect. Well, my unsolicited 2 cents here, mentoring is the way to go for people who really want to take that next step. Invest in yourself. Obviously, I know, it comes down to you have the means or you not have the means, but if you can, don't buy that extra lens or that lens that you may not use.
Wait a
Invest in
second.
something that's really going to pay dividends and
Isn't
get
this
that.
sponsored by B&H? We're supposed to.
We keep it a buck here on the event space. Well, Scott, always good having you on. Like you said, you're going to be back here multiple times.
Yes.
We got you. We got you for a couple more. We love having you on. So huge thank you to you for expending your knowledge and experience with us here. Of course, Sony for hosting, and to all of our viewers out there. Thank you guys for tuning in, for being a part of the show by getting your questions in. And we'll see you next time we have one of these. We're going to have Scott Robert Lim back soon enough. So stay tuned for that. Check out the rest of our schedule on the Event Space website. And if you haven't checked us out on YouTube, go over to YouTube, B&H Event Space. On there, you can find this and all of our other recorded live content there. But that is all we have for you today. Another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space, now in the books. Catch y'all next time.